Hi, I'm Donna Baker, owner of Golden Channel Publishing and genohistory.com. I'm so glad you made the very smart decision to add the 9060 Census Workbook to your toolkit. I designed the 9060 to make the U.S. decennial censuses from 1790 to 1860 as useful as they can be. These censuses will never be a roadblock for me again, and I hope they never will be for you. I love the 9060, and I know you're going to love it too. When you make your purchase from my online store at genohistory.com, you're going to get a PDF that looks like this. Some of you already have it. That's how you saw the getting started video. Others may have found it by another means. Before we talk about opening the workbook, I want to make note of two things below it. First, there is the link to the online manual, which if you have a lot of questions about how this is going to work and you want the detail in writing, that's where you'll find it. If you are not satisfied with your purchase, within 14 days, you can transfer ownership back to me, and the instructions are here for you. Now, the link to the program is right here in the middle, and this will open up your first copy of the spreadsheet. Anytime you click this link, it's going to open a new copy of the spreadsheet. This isn't how you go back in once you have started one. There are other instructions for that, but this will get you to the copy. So hold on to this PDF, store it somewhere safe, and you can always come back through this door. But should you lose this PDF, you can always go back to my website. If you created an account when you made the purchase, you can go back and you can download this again. All right, so let's click on this workbook link. Some of you will get this message, some of you won't. It's a security warning from Google Docs that ask if you want to remember this, you're about to allow this to go through. And if you click on remember this action for the site for all PDF elements, you won't see this message again. I'm going to turn it off because I may need it for future videos that I'm creating. But click allow, and it will let you into this screen that's going to allow you to make the copy of the original workbook. One thing I want to make note of before we click on that is it allows you to look at the code. Now, this was something I wrestled with long and hard, deciding if I was going to make the code accessible to customers. But I decided that in this world where we're so afraid of someone trying to load damaging software on our computers, that I wanted you to be able to see the script. And you can, if you can read JavaScript, you can look through and find out exactly what is there. You can make sure that there's nothing that you need to be worried about. Google has also done the same thing, and they are going to give you a warning and a chance to say that you allow this. And I'll show you that in a second. So you click on make a copy, and it is going to open. There you go. It opens the workbook to a screen that you'll really only see the first time you come in. Or anytime you make a new copy, you'll see this. But it gives you quick instructions for getting started. There are links to all the places that you can get information about my privacy statements, terms and conditions, and my take on your security. And then you can move down. Oh, I did want to mention that when you are on top of a link in Google, it brings a picture of the address for you to decide if you're going to go in. There are 4 links in this one cell, so it's got 4 here for you to decide if you want to click on one and go further. All right, so there are 2 things that you've got to do to move into the use of the product. First, Google wants you to authorize this, that you agree that my code can come into your PC and operate. And so this is where you do that. You authorize. Now, if you've already authorized this, you're coming in a second time for some reason, it's not going to do anything, but it should, the first time you ever come in, when you click on authorize, it should bring you up a message from Google that asks you, yes, here it goes, authorization required. It says a script in here needs your permission to run. Now, a lot of Google scripts will give you about 6 or 7 things that you are authorizing the programmer to do. In my case, I limited this to the very minimum a programmer can do in Google without it asking you to have to authorize all kinds of scary things. So when you click continue, it's going to first of all ask you who you are, which account you want to use. You've got to use a Google account to do this. If you're just a visitor on somebody else's account, you don't have to have a Google account. You do not have to have a Gmail address, by the way, but just a Google account. If you don't have one, you can click on use another account and you can make one. If you have multiple Gmail accounts, you can pick which one you want. So I'm going into mine. All right, so it gives you a screen. One of the things that people trip up on here is that for some reason, the screen never shows you all the way to the bottom. You need to click on allow here because it's showing you the one thing that I'm using the programs to do in yours that you need to authorize. View and manage spreadsheets that this application has been installed in. And just the most basic thing any programmer would have to do to automate anything in your system. So you click allow. The second thing is my request that you authorize, because I need you to acknowledge to me that you understand that I own the copyright to this, including that script I just gave you, that all of this belongs to me. The new data you put in does not belong to me, but the structure does. You can't give this away to other people. You can share your own copy with them if they want to work with you or view what you've done, but you can't just give someone the copy. You can't send the PDF I sent you without violating the law. And I just ask you here when you click get started to acknowledge that you understand that it's protected under international copyright. So click yes. It's going to close that screen. You won't see it again unless you make a copy of this software, and it brings you to the dashboard. Right? This dashboard is where you will find yourself coming anytime you open this up new again. And it gives you several things on this. First, you're going to have a sheet selection. There's only one sheet in here right now, the one that I have just generically labeled census sheet. And you've got workbook statistics, so it tells you basically how big your sheet is getting if you are approaching Google's limits to what you can have in here. It also gives you a chance to know, how many census records you're creating and what the next account's going to be for a new unique census record in here. So it gives you sort of a sense of where you are. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit. There's just a tiny little bit down here at the bottom. It's the last thing on this sheet. I have given you 2 user-defined fields. You can put your own labels here for what you want to call them, and you can decide if they're text or numeric. Which will determine how they sort or filter. Now, this allows you, if you want to keep some sort of data that's just uniquely yours, you want to keep a link to their Ancestry account, or you want to put an X beside 5 people that you want to filter down to because you just want to look at those 5 people right now. You can use the user-defined fields any way you want. If you, as you get moving on this and you've got multiple sheets, by the way, you can see sheets beginning to create tabs across the bottom. The list here includes sheets that are hidden, and it puts them in alphabetical order so that it gives you another way to find the sheets that you might be using. But if you have changed the name of a sheet in the middle of one of your sessions, it might not automatically change that name here. So you can click refresh sheets and it will go out and find any changes you've made to sheets, and it will refresh this drop-down list. This drop-down list right now just has one census sheet, and I'm going to click open sheet.
This is the census sheet, the typical one. You can make quite a few of these. I think up to as many as 185 in one workbook. You can have as many workbooks as you want. So you're never going to run out of the ability to capture data. And when you open it up like this, you're going to see it in a collapsed state. And a lot of your data, detailed data, is going to be collapsed beneath these four total headings. And I'll show you more about that in a second. But you also can have your screen smaller, larger, whatever you want, whatever works for your particular ability to see. I right now have my screen set at 125%. Your browser will usually let you zoom in or zoom out. If I want to see this more close up, I'm in Google Chrome, so I use a control and the plus sign on my numeric keyboard, and I can zoom in and see something that's too small or too light for me to see, and I can zoom out and make it smaller if I want to fit more on the screen. But 125% is my ideal. Now you can see here that the menu that allows you to do many things with this tool is the 96 census menu. If you are not seeing this on your screen, one of several things could be true. If anything aborted or hung up in the opening of the product, sometimes this will not have loaded. So you can simply refresh the screen with your refresh button, which is usually just to the left of your URL. All right, so you hit refresh and let it reload. Sometimes in Google, you might have, or in Google Chrome, you might have, actually, excuse me, Google Sheets, you might have this particular button here on the right side might have been pressed, and it would have made your menus disappear. So all you have to do is click this little button and they come back. If you like to have your screen only on half the screen, you're looking at something else while you work, then you might notice that the menu gets covered over. So watch this as I close this up, I tightened up the screen. You see that this little toolbar that Google always has on the menu has covered up that particular menu item. If I make the screen wider, it's there. If you need to have your screen like this though, and it's going to be covered up, there is a trick to get to it. You just hold down your Alt key and press H to activate the help menu that's to the left of it. And then you hit right arrow and it'll go over and it'll open it up. But of course, the ideal thing is to actually have it showing. Let me open back up the screen. All right, so with the menu, let me show you at the top of the menu, I've put a little crib sheet for you for something that's going to matter to those of you who like keyboard shortcuts. I love keyboard shortcuts. I find that having to pick up my mouse and move around and click on things is more time consuming than I like. So many of the items on the main menu here, I open by using the shortcuts that you see to the right. But since this was not going to be a self-explanatory shortcut, 3 keys, 0, 3 keys, 1, and so forth, I put the explanation up here so you can always remind yourself. If you're on a PC, the 3 keys that you're going to hold down are your Control-Alt-Shift keys. And then while you're holding them down, you press whatever number is to the right. They all have to be done at the same time, and then you let go. Now, important note that you can't use the numbers that are over to the right on your numeric keypad. You have to use the numbers that are above your keyboard for these to work. And they will save you a lot of time. Get used to using them. If you're on a Mac, you use the Command, Option, and Shift keys instead. Right. So hopefully that little note at the top will help you. Many of the things you're going to do in this product are here on this menu, and I have done many tools to help you make this as useful as it can be. You see that there's a lot of sub menus off to the right, wherever you see a little arrow. Okay, so we're not going to go into the details on these while we're doing the quick start menu, but I do mostly want you to notice 4 things on here that we'll talk about in quick start. Adding the census record is one thing you'll do all the time. Completing the sort and filter data is the second half of adding a census record. I'll show you that in a few minutes. Collapsing and expanding the sections allows you to see the detailed part of your spreadsheet. So those are the main ones we'll look at today. There are many other things that you can find in the online manual and eventually probably in new videos. All right, so let's take a look at how to expand the sheet. If you want to expand everything on the sheet to the entire 195 columns that this is made up of, you can do your shortcut key and do 4, that expands, or you can go back up to the menu and do it where I just showed you. As you see, when you do this, all of those sections that were under the totals collapse. They expand out. All right, and so you see the white males, white females, free non-white men, free non-white women, enslaved men, enslaved women. An important thing to know as you do this work is that some censuses put enslaved people ahead of non-white free, which they would usually call free colored in those censuses. So you need to make sure before you start to put your data in that you're putting data into the right section. All right, and then as I go over to the right, you see that ending section that you saw before that allows you to put in comments. The information here in the sort and filter data is something that allows us to take the sometimes mashed together data, sometimes misspelled data and so forth that comes out of the census, and to put this in a form that can be sorted on the given name, surname, the suffix, if you ever have a reason to search on the suffix, on the community, county, state, the year, the census year. You don't sort on the census day, but it is here for you to look at, which you'll see in a second. And then the user-defined fields that I mentioned on the first page. All right, so on the expanding and the collapsing, if you want to use a shortcut key to take this back to where it was, you just do the 3 keys plus 3, and it brings it back, or you go to the menu and say that you want to collapse. Now, often, though, that you'll be working in one section at a time. So let's say that you're working on the white family of a household. So you can just click on these plus signs above and go in, do what you're going to do. I'm actually going to shrink the screen a little bit so that I have this full section in it. And you can see that while the freed and the enslaved families are still collapsed over here under their totals, the white males and white females have expanded out. You also see that the whole section looks darker. That's because it is selected as you open up. So you can just click in any field and it's going to deselect it and you're ready to work. Now, if you want to collapse that section back again, you can click on what is now a little minus sign up here above the totals. Or you can just click somewhere on this little line, this tiny little line that's above the column headings. Okay, so that's how you expand and collapse and get around in the census sheet. One other thing to note before we actually put in census work, I remind you that wherever you see the big H you have access to the online manual. So there is much detail there, maybe more than you ever want to read. But if you want to look at it, you get on this H and then you follow the link right here to the manual. That is a lot of data though, and a lot of times you just need a quick answer. So if you look at the labels that are above this sheet, year, do you see this little black triangle in the corner? If you see that, then there is help information, quick help information available about that specific thing. All right, so this, you see that this is about the head of household field. While you are in it, you can come down to this little corner and expand it if it's got more data than can be seen at one time. And then anytime you click out of it, then it disappears from sight. But that'll bring you quick answers to things that I thought you might need answers to on the fly. Okay, now let's take a look at how to put in a census record. You're going to be dealing with all sorts of variations of quality when it comes to census records. That's probably why you're here. They can be very tough to read sometimes. Let me show you one. This is just an average one, not more difficult to read than most. Some are much worse, but it has its challenges. For one thing, this census record from 1820, Spartanburg, town of Spartanburg County of South Carolina, as you can see here. This one comes from Ancestry. It has no headings at the top. So trying to figure out where you are can be a challenge when you're trying to do this the old-fashioned way. I'm going to show you how to help yourself in that case now. For me to put these in, my trick is to try to put the person I want to enter against the top margin to make them very easy to see. All right, so in this case, I'm gonna shrink this screen because I want my census sheet to be at the bottom so I can put in the data. So I make this top part just about this big, and I begin to expand it somewhat. Make it a little bit less than that. I get it to a size I like. The person I'm going after in this case is a man named Samuel Turner. All right, so you see where I have put him against this top margin so that I eliminate all the chaos above him to make it easier to see. And then when I come back to my census sheet, I'm going to shrink it as well so that it is only showing me Samuel Turner. Okay, so if I'm entering several people in a row from that page, I can show a little bit more. Okay, so that makes it much more easy to see what I'm doing. Now, I always start my data entry with these things, these totals columns collapsed, because I'm going to deal with the name and the location information first, and then I'll deal with the census detail. All right, so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to call to get a census template record here. Okay, so I put my cursor in the very first row that's available. If you wanted to have empty space and put yours down here, that's fine. It's very, very flexible on how you do this, on what order you put things in. If you like to use the menu and the mouse, you go up to the menu and you're going to add census record here. I'm a shortcut person, as I said, and so I always use the 3 keys and the 1. I never open the menu in this case. All right, so I am going to do my shortcut, and it's going to bring up a little window that's asking me what decade I'm looking at. So I type in 1820. If you're a mouse person, you're going to come over and you're going to put the mouse on OK, but I'm a shortcut person. So I press tab and space and it gets me where I need to be. All right, so it goes out, it's pulling the template for me. As you'll notice, you probably noticed for a second, there was a red bar here and it disappeared. That red bar is checking to make sure that as it pulls in the template, it has all the right formulas in place and that it has an ID number here. The ID numbers are not used for a lot in this particular version of the 9060, but I've put them in for future use in case there's a way we're going to want to use ID numbers later. The one way you might use an ID number is if later, when you've done a lot of sorting and filtering and you move things around, you want to remember what you put in behind a particular name. What was the next name you put in? That would be its use right now. But this red line here that you see is telling me that I don't have any names in. The system is always going to want something in the head of household field, and it's going to want at least a surname over here in the sort and filter record. And when those are both in place, the red bar disappears. The red bar is not going to keep you from functioning, but it's just an alert that you might be missing key information. All right, so one of the first things I'm going to put in over here is something that I added with this formally that I had done informally with the old Early Federal Census Worksheet for those of you who were using the earlier iteration. I started putting page numbers in below the census number because it has multiple layers of value. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and I see that I'm on page 44. So I type in a 44 here so that I'll always know what page it was on. Now that is for reference, but to be able to go back to the page, this, in Ancestry, if I need to go back and find this in Ancestry. But it also can be useful if you are entering all the people with a particular surname in a particular county, which I often have to do when I'm trying to find an ancestor. It'll tell you if several people with the same last name were on the same page or on subsequent pages, which gives you an idea that they might have been relatives. All right, and can be helpful. But another thing I started doing with this page number to make it super powerful for me is that I began to grab the URL back here on the census record. I grab the URL, I copy it, and I come down here to the page number again, right click on it and say insert link. And right here, I paste in the link and I hit apply. Okay, so from now on, if I want to go back to that page, so long as I've logged into Ancestry and I go to follow that link, it's going to take me straight to that page. It's going to be so much easier to go back. Because sometimes when I find a person in a census, I had to do page by page hunting for them. You never want to do that hunting again. So this is very helpful. All right, let's put in the name of the person. You can see that this matches the head of household and the location are in these two fields. Every census record is 2 lines long, as you've probably already seen. Okay, so I'm going to put it exactly the way it is in this census record. SAML Turner. Now, there's a reason I do it this way. Even if the name is dreadfully misspelled, I do it this way so that when I'm scanning to look for this thing again, trying to find it where I found it before, I have it exactly the way it was. I know what to look for. I'll show you in a second how to clean it up and make it so that you also have the name as it should be. In the location field, you want to put 2 to 3 things. You want at least the county and the state. You should always have those when you're doing a census. If you have a locality, a town or a village or a community, then you want to include that. You want to put that first. You want all 3 separated by commas. You can put the state in its 2-digit postal code if you want to use shorthand. That's what I do. My system is always going to convert it to that for filtering and sorting. So unless you just like it formally typed out, you don't have to type out the state name. But you do need to make sure you always have commas between the 3 elements. I don't put the word county very much when I'm doing this anymore. I used to, but I have found it now that I have a way of putting the county in a sortable field. I don't feel like I need to actually write the word county. If you're dealing with a district or a parish, and you think that you need to know that it was called parish rather than county, you can put that in here. But in this case, we're dealing with the town of Spartanburg in the county of Spartanburg in South Carolina. All right, so I'm going to type in Spartanburg, comma, Spartanburg, comma, SC for South Carolina. All right, so it has been programmed to be able to look at what I've put here and to do the work of getting sort and filter data ready. Because clearly, if you were trying to sort and filter on what I've put here, it doesn't know that Turner's a last name. So over here, we're going to have that happen. You can type it in manually, but you don't have to. I am going to do another shortcut key. If you're using the menu, you go to complete, sort, and filter data. It means you're doing it just on this row, and it will not override any data you have already typed into this last section, the sort and filter section. But I use these shortcut keys, 3 keys, 2. So I'm going to do that. Hold down the 3 keys, press the numeral 2 above my keyboard. And it has figured it all out that Samuel is the given name. The last name is Turner. The community, Spartanburg, the county, Spartanburg, and the state of South Carolina. Now, if there is something very weird about this and it's been typed oddly, or if you're pulling in old data from your early federal census worksheet that is in a strange form, maybe it just has one name or something, it may not know what to do with it. So you need to check behind it and see what it's done. Now, in this case, if you know that this person's name was not SAML, but Samuel, you can if you want more complete data, you can put Samuel there. If you know his middle name or his middle initial, and you're sure of it, you can put that here in this information. If you know that the county that has been put here on the census later changed names, and you want to use the other name, you can do that. So this is about getting a consistent data bank here about the people you're collecting, so that if you sort or filter, you are finding what you intended to find. All right. Now, one thing that is over here that's automatically put in is the census year again. It's duplicated here so that it can be used in sorting and filtering, because you'll often want to filter or sort on census years. For your benefit, the census day has been put down here. It is not a sorting field, but this is something I often had to look up. What day of the year did the government say was the official census day, the day on which all ages should be calculated? That if the census taker came on August 1st, you're supposed to say what age the person would be on August 7th in this case. And then you've got the fields that you can define. You can, on your dashboard, you can choose to put different labels in these 2 fields, but you can use them for whatever is useful to you, or you can choose not to use them at all. Okay, so let's look at the detail now. In this case, we've got, you can tell by the double lines where sections end. And so always in the censuses, the first 2 sections are first white males and then white females. It gets a little hazy after that if you're just trying to go on memory. What comes next? And so if I don't have headings on the page, and sometimes even if I do, because they can be problematic, I go and look at what the government said these other columns needed to be. What I'm looking for is, are these enslaved people? Are they people of color who lived in the household? And I've got what appears to be 2 sections. I think the census taker did this wrong. I think that this was supposed to be the double line, but you're never sure until you look at what the government said needed to be here. So I do that before I get started on typing it in. And here's what I've done for your convenience. Anytime you're doing this, the census date over here has a link to the National Archives information about that census. And it tells you a lot. I mean, you can learn a lot from coming over here and looking at what they have to say about that census. But I always scroll down to look at the headings. And if you look at the length of these headings, you can understand why the census taker did not copy them over on every page. But in this case, you've got the headings where you've got the free white people here in this section. When we get to the next section, we're dealing with enslaved people. In my spreadsheet, the free colored, as they're called here, but in the spreadsheet, they're called free non-white because they could also be Native American, they could be Mexican. The number of things could happen with color of people. So sometimes the free colored persons in the census were first and the enslaved people were second. So just know before you start putting in data which came first. In this case, the enslaved people are the section right after the white family. All right, so I'm coming back. You see that it's its own tab here. I'm coming back to the spreadsheet. All right, I'm going to start with a white section. I do one section at a time just to keep the sheet from getting messy. And usually it's fairly consistent that the numbers and the blanks match what you see from the census taker and what you see in this census sheet. There is something special that happened with the 1820 census, and I made a note of it here. That's why you see this little green box at the boys who are, if you look at the ages beneath, basically ages 16 to 18. And so the green is an alert. It tells you need to look at something. So here's a note about that and what you need to know about how these columns were used in 1820. In 1820, every boy that showed up in column 3, the 16 to 18, was supposed to be also showing up in the next column, which was 16 to 25. All right, so the government had a reason for doing that. For census takers, it can get confusing. All right, it's helpful to us because now we have a much more fine-grained idea of the age of young white men in this category. But because we don't want to duplicate them for our use with families, that would be confusing about the actual format of the family. If you have anyone showing up, any boy showing up in this category, you are going to remove them from the next category. Now, I noticed that many census takers didn't do this right, so you're going to be very careful on the 1820 census. Let this green field always remind you to take care. Okay, so let's put them in as he did. In this case, he didn't have any boys in this category. So we don't have to worry about here. Well, one thing we do know is that the young men in what he would have considered the 16 to 25 category were actually 19 to 25. So we know a little bit more about the age of any young men in that category. So we're going to do it like he did. He's got a 1, a 1, a space, a 1, a space, a 1. So we're going to do it the same way here. 1. I use my right arrow key, 1 space, 1 space, 1. Okay, now you notice that as you put anything in one of these cells, it's supposed to turn yellow. That's going to help you as you begin to compare one census with another, one person with another, to have a sense of whether you're dealing with the same family or a different family. It's going to give you a picture of who's coming and going in a family dynamic. So that'll make more sense as we see some of them together. All right, now we're going to look at the women next. And as you see, he's got 4 blanks and 1. So there was only 1 female in this family, and she was in the last age category. So we're going to go over here and put the 1. so that we've got her. And you see that we have now the total of white family members in this particular census record has totaled 5. Okay, so I'm going to close up whites. And since we have one record in the enslaved people, which appears to be the second second column of the enslaved males, I'm going to open up the enslaved. I'm going to click in the second column and I'm going to put 3 there. All right. And as you see, it has now put 3 over here in the total. Okay. We do not appear to have any women, any enslaved women, and we don't have any colored families that were free in this census record. So now we have the picture of this family. Okay, and you can collapse this back down again. So that's how you do a census. Of course, I've been talking it through, so it took a lot longer than it normally would, but that's how you do a census record. Now I want to show you how to use one of the headings here to give yourself more information than you can get just by looking at a census without doing math. As you look at each of these items that I've put in, you are seeing that above it, there are years. Below it, you have the ages that are in the census, that are in the census headings. Now, those can be confusing to read the way they did them. I'm going to zoom in on this so that we can look at this information fairly closely. In the census record, it usually uses elaborate words like white males age 10 and under 16. Okay. So I did the best I could without taking up too much space underneath each set of census detail data to give you the age as it is in the census record, but I don't put the full range. All right. So as you look at each column, the first group of young white males are under 10. So they are basically newborn to age 9. Okay. So as you look at the next column, that means that this is the group of men who start at 10. Okay. So 10 to less than 16 means 10 to 15. Okay. So once you get used to what these mean, you begin to be able to do the ranges in your head. Okay, so as you look above, though, what this is that is invaluable as you're doing your research is that we've put the likeliest year of birth or the range, the likely range of birth years if a person showed up in this category. So if you have a person sitting in this category, you know that they were born sometime between 1805 at the earliest to 1810 at the latest. Now, the reason there are 2 ranges here is that if we were doing another year, if we're doing another census year, the categories might overlap this by, halfway. So we have to have as many columns across the top as is required to match all of the censuses from 1790 to 1860. So in this case, there's another census somewhere that breaks off this one group, the ones that were born in 1805. So if you've got a kid in here, he's born between 1805 and 1810. Let's take a look now at what it looks like to have this data in place. You can do it in so many different ways. You can do it in different orders. You can clump people in whatever way works for you. The question is to ask yourself, what's going to help me solve my problem? So whatever your problem is, you're going to do this different ways. You're looking at my way of solving a problem when I was looking for the parent of a person named Hannah, last name Hannah, who showed up in the county I'm researching. At that time, it was called Benton County, Alabama. And all I knew is that they had come from South Carolina, and I knew their age. But I needed to find the household that they would have lived in when they were not yet of age and were in their parents' household in South Carolina. So that is the problem that stumps most of us. So I began to do this by looking, first of all, at the fact that I knew that the person that this Hannah person had married was from Spartanburg, South Carolina. I knew that there was a good possibility that the person named Hannah was from Spartanburg as well. So that's where I started my search, and actually ended up being the right person. The right county, excuse me. The right person was a bigger deal. I had to go through that county looking for the Hannahs, and I ended up doing, I think, most of the Hannahs that were in South Carolina between 1790 and I think 1840. And then I also looked at neighboring York County, since they might have been, they lived across county lines from each other. So I was gathering a lot of data looking for a person that might be my father, the father of this person. So the way you can do this, as you begin to collect data, if it's not an obvious person because they have such a bizarre name that you instantly know who they are, gather multiple people. Now, they may turn out not to be yours, or you may even know they're not yours. I go ahead and gather them all because you never know if later you're going to find out they're related to the family in another way. Or later, it may be helpful. You may save yourself doing the same work twice by putting people in here that you decide are not your family, and then you can just hide their record. And I do that by, you can get into the record and you can choose to hide selected rows or shortcut 5 in this thing. So if you hide somebody, they're still there, and there's a clue over in the left column that there's a hidden record there, so you know they're there, and you can come back and see who you've eliminated and not have to do the work twice. All right, but one of the ways that I would do this if I were you, let's say that it's a woman, and her maiden name is Hannah, and you're looking for her father, then you are looking for the women in a man's household who was named Hannah. So you get all the men named Hannah, all right, and you're looking for if she was, if you know based on her age when she got to your county, that she would have been under the age of 16 at the time that she was here. You can then begin to scan down the row looking for anyone who had a young female in their house at that time. And that lets you begin to narrow down which of these men might have been her father. And then you can begin to work those families in other ways. You can begin to do trees or whatever to begin to figure out who can you eliminate. And I have been very fortunate in being able to eventually figure out who my person was by using this technique. The richest research and analysis you can do is when you begin to get consecutive records of a family, decade by decade, and can begin to see how things are changing from one to the next. Since this tool lays apples with apples, lines everything up so that you're looking at the same person decade by decade as they age, you can begin to ask yourself why they appear when they do, why they disappear when they do. And all of that begins to fill out your story, even though you still might not have a name for your family. All right, I am going to look at just one set of records that I had done some time back and imported in from the old tool, the Early Federal Census Worksheet. This is the family of David McGee. I found them in Tuscaloosa County, Alabama in 1850. I was doing a study of enslavement patterns then, and so I began to work my way backwards to try to figure out where David came from. So that's what you're seeing here. I tend to work backwards when I'm doing these. So mine are often laid out 1850, 1840, 1830. You may do it differently, as we've talked about, but here is something you can learn even before you've expanded out the whole sheet. You can tell movements. All right. So whether you're looking here or you're looking here, it becomes quite apparent that he lived in North Carolina in Wilkes County, and that sometime after 1820 he made a move. Now, we don't know if he moved directly to Tuscaloosa County, Alabama, but that's where he was by 1830, and that's where he lived out the rest of his life. He disappears from the censuses by 1860, so he dies sometime in the 1850s. You can also tell, just before you even look at detail, you can tell by the totals that he went from a very large household of white inhabitants down to just 2. So as he got older in life, there were fewer in the household. But you can also see that he went from a person who owned no slaves to one who owned them, starting sometime around the 1820s. He began with 5, or he had 5 by the time the 1830 census taker came through. 10 years later, he has 8 instead of 5. So you have questions here about whether he's buying and selling, whether there are children coming into the mix by the female enslaved people. And then there's 8 again by 1850. Are they the same 8? Those are the questions I would be asking about the enslaved people, because all of those things tell you something about the economics of the person you're dealing with. If you descend from the enslaved people, it helps you to know whether you need to be looking at your ancestor. If you have an idea who your ancestor is, where they began in 1870 and you're moving backwards, it tells you whether you need to be looking for them in a single household that tended to keep enslaved people for life, or whether they are being bounced in and out, whether it's a family that's moving enslaved people from father's house to daughter's house to father's house again. So look at those patterns, whether you are doing this from the perspective of the slaveholder or the perspective of the enslaved. It would also be interesting to know if you have free colored people showing up in the process, and that raising questions about the family and how they were getting things done, what their particular situation was in the world. All right, so I'm going to open up the white section of this so that we can take a look. We're not going to go into too much detail because there's just too much. But I did want you to see how laying out these things side by side is going to begin to give you great questions to ask. The one person we're most sure of in these censuses is David McGee himself. In 1850, he was the one I found there, and then I moved backwards in time. So as you can see, there's a fairly consistent line of the yellow. There seems to have been probably a census glitch right here. The census taker got the wrong information or wrote it down wrong, but we know he was born in 1763 because of the 1850 census. So you can see that this line runs through every single census except for 1810, and that one is right on the cusp. But you can also see that he was young in 1790. He would have been, well, he would have probably been the youngest of the 3 white males who were showing up in that category. So the question now is, who is the head of the household at this time? He's a boy. So would seem likely that his father is also named David McGee, and that we're now looking at his father's household. That might be true in 1800 as well. So you begin to parse out who's who. You can see that an older person is here, and but this seems to be our David. By this time, by the time of 1810, it's our David. So he has probably lost his father or older brother, or whoever the older males were in his household have disappeared after 1800. So that gives you things to look for, the wills, graves, whatever you might be able to find that's going to give you more detail on the family. He's the most consistent of them all. If you look at the women in the family, we've got 7 starting in 1790. And we have an older woman who seems to disappear after 1800. And then we have older women that are bouncing in and out. You've got one that shows up here, and one here, and then another one here, and then another one here. And so the question is, was the census taker getting it wrong every time? Is it possible he was asking the man who didn't really know his wife's age very well? Or are their daughters coming back to live with their dad as their mother dies? Or does he have multiple wives? Well, as it turns out, there were 3 wives. The one of the first older women, and this is probably his own mother, and then he's got 3 different wives coming along. And so this story tells us we need to be looking for multiple wives, or we need to be looking for widowed daughters who are coming back. So whenever you've got the bouncing in and out of women, especially the older women, it often will tell you that there's a death that you can investigate in your other resources. You're also looking for children who show up that weren't there before, because it raises questions. Look at this, for example. David McGee in 1810 shows a son who is between the age of 10 and 15. There are no children younger than that. But the next census shows a child who would have been in that age category 10 years earlier. So that leaves a question. Is this a grandchild who's living with him? Or was this younger child out of the house for some reason at census time? What would account for a child showing up in his teenage years who had not shown up earlier? Now, there's always the chance it's the census taker making a mistake, but often it will trigger you to go after data, to go after documents, to look for answers. It is not at all unusual for a widowed daughter to come and live with mom and dad for a while with her kids before she marries again. So all of these raise questions, and all of it makes a richer and richer picture of this person that you're researching. So it is so valuable to lay this all out. And I encourage you to make sure that you get the data on any people who are of different ethnicity who are in the same household, because it gives you priceless information about your family, even if you're looking at people who were not related within the household. All right, before we wrap up, I do want to quickly take one more look at the menu so that you can see whether there are things here that might be of interest. You're going to sometimes want to create a new sheet. You do that sort of thing under Manage Sheets. You can add a census sheet. If you want, for some reason, to have a blank sheet that doesn't have the census headings on it, you can do that here. If you want to hide every sheet except the dashboard, you can tell it to do that. If you want to, if you have hidden in the past some of your sheets and you want them to show again, you can show all of your census sheets. And if you have, for whatever reason, left some sheets showing that you shouldn't have open. The ones that are used for administrative things like sorting and filtering. Sometimes if a process stops in the middle, something might be left open on your desktop you don't want there. So hide all administrative sheets will hide all of those sheets that are needed for the macros for the code, but that you yourself don't need to be messing with. We didn't do it, but you can insert a subheading. As you see behind us on David McGee and Joseph McGee, you can insert a subheading. We've talked about collapsing, expanding sections. We've talked briefly about hiding selected rows. If there are people you've researched and you want for a while to keep them out of sight, you can hide those. The sort and filter mechanism will allow you to complete that sort and filter data. Let's say you've moved in all your old early federal census worksheet data, and there's the instructions for that are in the online help. If you have pulled them in and you need to fill in a whole sheet worth of the sort and filter data at the end of each line, you can do the whole sheet here. If it finds anything in its path, anything that you have typed in, it's going to override it though. So you want to be sure that that's what you want to do. That you can sort a whole sheet, you can filter a whole sheet, and you can also restart a sort if it pauses in the middle. You need to be aware that Google, because so many of us are using Google's resources, they put a 6-minute limit on any code running. So if you're running something and you have a lot of records and it takes a long time, Google will stop the process in the middle. So I've put ways in generally to restart something that stops in the middle. You can filter the sheet, and that will only so that it only shows certain records that you're interested in at the moment. That's a temporary measure. It's not something you want to do and then just leave it. So when you're done with looking at what you filtered, you can remove the filter in this last option. The utilities, oftentimes you're not going to be using the utilities. If you're bringing in data from the old early federal census worksheets, you're going to be using this reformat full sheet. You may sometimes find that format problems have happened in a line and you can reformat a line or a group of lines. Most of the other things are for when something goes wrong. And so usually you can find in online help how to use these if something has stopped working and you want to try to fix it. There are also in your online help, there are all the instructions for how to get help if you need it, how to find it in multiple ways. And you can, if you need to, get in touch with me. I am one person though, so it might take a while for me to get back. It's better for you to try through the other options first. And if you still can't find an answer, then I give you a way to get to me when you are seeking help. All right, and there's also my email address if you have purchased the product and you are installing and having issues with the install, just email me directly and we'll work on that. I think you're going to love this product. I can't do without it. Would never try to do the early censuses without this anymore. So I am so glad you're giving it a try. Let me know if you're having any trouble and let me know how I can make it better. Thank you.